Harmony. Two shards that are fundamentally opposed to each other, and 300 years spent finding out whether one man can actually hold both without breaking. Let's take a look at who Sazed was before he became Harmony, and the theories that suggest that Harmony isn't as stable as 300 years of peace might suggest. Welcome to Second Breakfast. My name's Lee. Join me as we explore the lore, theories, and biggest questions of the Cosmere, because if I have the questions, maybe you do too. If that sounds like your cup of tea, consider subscribing and joining us for future journeys into the Cosmere. Before he was Harmony, Sazed was first and foremost a servant. A Terrisman born into the people the Final Empire had reduced to stewards, valets, and servants, prized for discretion and loyalty, moved between noble households like furniture. That was the world Sazed was born into. Yet beneath that life of service lay a very different calling. Sazed belonged to the Terris Keepers, feruchemists dedicated to preserving the knowledge that the Lord Ruler had spent 1,000 years suppressing. Different keepers specialised in different fields. Sazed's was religion. He devoted his life to preserving faiths and philosophies the Final Empire had nearly erased. Entire belief systems kept alive in metal, waiting for a world that might finally be ready to hear them again. Long before ruin or preservation entered the picture, that search for faith defined who Sazed was. He joined Kelsier primarily as Vin's tutor, teaching her noble etiquette, history, and patience. Amid Kelsier's whirlwind plans, Sazed becomes Vin's calm and steady anchor. Perhaps the closest thing she ever has to a father. And then there's Tindwyl, another keeper. Tindwyl studied the lives of kings, generals, and emperors, searching history for the qualities that made great leaders. She was sent to mould Ellen Venture into the king that Luthadel needed. Instead, she found someone who shared her devotion for preserving the past. Together, she and Sazed spent long nights studying ancient prophecies, and somewhere between scholarship and duty, they fell in love. And then, Tindwyl was killed by the rampaging Kolosh during the siege of Luthadel. After that, something inside Sazed broke that never truly healed. He turned on every religion he had spent his life preserving. All of it, he decided, was a lie. Not one of the 300 faiths he had studied could explain why she had to die. That's the man standing at the end of Hero of Ages, faithless, grieving, watching the world end around him. A dying sun, the world turning red with waist-high ash, fire and brimstone, with everything he's fought to protect coming apart. And that's when he finds the final pieces of the puzzle, knowledge preserved in metal beyond ruin's reach. In the world's final hours, Sazed finally understands the truth behind ruin, preservation, and the prophecies that had been corrupted for centuries. The hero will bear the future of the world on his arms. Suddenly, the Hero of Ages prophecy he had spent his entire life studying made perfect sense. The hero will have the power to save the world, but he shall also have the power to destroy it. And so that is exactly what he does. At the end of Hero of Ages, when all hope is lost for Sazed and for Scadrial, he takes up ruin and preservation simultaneously in the event known as the Final Ascension, or the Catacendre. In a single moment, Sazed's search ends. He becomes a god worthy of the religions that he studied his entire life, knowledge he had spent a lifetime preserving. He remakes the broken world the Lord Ruler left behind. The ash falls no more, and the world is reborn. He names himself Harmony, a union of two opposing shards held together by a single mind. But to understand what Sazed actually inherited on that day, we need to go back much further, because like Sazed, ruin and preservation also began as people. 10,000 years ago, a single unified god named Allomancy was shattered by a group of conspirators. See that video. The result was 16 separate traits of Allomancy distilled into shards. 16 fragments of god-level investiture, each one carrying an intent so overwhelming it reshapes whoever holds it. Two of those shards ended up on Scadrial, Preservation and Ruin. Preservation's original vessel was a man named Leras. His intent was permanence, structure, the desire to keep things exactly how they are. Ruin existed on the same world, pursuing the opposite of everything Leras wanted. Think about what pure, uncontested preservation would actually look like. Nothing changes, nothing grows, nothing dies, and by the same logic, nothing really lives either. Life depends on constant cycles of creation and decay. Leras understood that, and his goal was never really to eliminate ruin completely, just to hold it in balance long enough for life to flourish. This idea sheds new light on Rashek. The Lord Ruler preserved his empire for 1,000 years through absolute control, freezing society in place. Perhaps that's what preservation looks like when it's taken to its extreme, an example of perfect stagnation. And Leras had one final contingency. He gave humanity a weapon disguised as a gift, the potential for Allomancy. By investing part of himself into the people of Scadrial, he ensured that even after his own death, preservation would continue living on through humanity itself, as confirmed by Sanderson. One day, that gift might be enough to oppose Ruin. However, the sacrifice left preservation permanently diminished. Ruin's original vessel was a man named Ati. Before ascending to the Shard of Ruin, Ati was known as the Kind Man. One of the kindest, in fact. Beloved, as we have highlighted before from Hoyd and Tanavast. The kind of man other shard holders described with a degree of melancholy because of what the Shard of Ruin has done to Ati. Ruin's intent is entropy, decay, the truth that everything eventually falls apart. Subsequently, the kind man vanished, and what was left was ruin, unencumbered destruction. Ruin made his own countermove to preservation's Allomancy, Hemalurgy, stealing another person's investiture through spikes driven into the body, a corrupted mirror of what preservation had done, to take rather than give. And importantly, this did not cost Ati in the same way that it did Leras. And Feruchemy works differently from either. It doesn't borrow power from the outside the way Allomancy does, and it doesn't steal from someone else the way Hemalurgy does. A Feruchemy stores an attribute now and spends it back later, and the whole system only works because both halves operate in tandem, managing a careful balancing act, storing power away by weakening yourself in the interim and keeping it safe until it's needed. Looking back, it's hard not to see Feruchemy as a miniature version of the balance Sazed will one day force to maintain itself. Ati's eventual corruption is typical of Cosmere investiture rules. Given enough time, due to the unimaginable amount of investiture involved, a shard's intent will reshape whoever's holding it, no matter how resolute they may be. Ati held out for years before losing, trying to guide Ruin towards entropy rather than full-blown destruction, which is worth remembering once we get to Sazed. If a fundamentally good man like Ati could eventually lose himself to ruin, the obvious question becomes, how long can anyone resist a shard's intent? Preservation saw what Ruin was trying to do with the world that he had built, and made a choice that defined the next 1,000 years. His power itself, the investiture behind Allomancy and the Mist, stayed fully intact. It kept protecting Scadrial for the entire time, right up until Sazed's ascension. What he spent instead was something smaller and far more personal, his own mind. Sanderson has confirmed that preservation's consciousness was always a separate, limited thing from his power, and it was that very consciousness that he drew on to bind Ruin inside the well. It worked, but it left him a faint remnant of who he had been, one that takes shape through the trilogy as the Mist Spirit, the ghostly half-formed figure Vin keeps encountering in the Mist itself. And by the time Vin meets him, preservation is little more than a fading shadow of the man that Leras once was. And that's the vessel whose burden Sazed will soon inherit. That's part of the tragedy underneath Era 1. Preservation gave away almost everything left of his own mind, and it left him too diminished to more prominently intervene when the world needed him most. He instead relied on a well thought out plan, the Mists and the Allomancers. Ruin, meanwhile, spent 1,000 years working from inside his prison to get free. Wherever he could reach in, he had already corrupted the Terris prophecies once, steering Alendi through the well with instructions that would have released him. Rashek stopped that specific plan by killing Alendi and taking the power himself, then held on to it for 1,000 years precisely to make sure nobody else got the chance either. Ruin still reached him in smaller ways throughout the centuries, nudging his moods here and there, but Rashek's entire reign was built around denying Ruin exactly what he wanted. Ruin's real opening came later, when he turned to Vin instead and corrupted the same prophecy all over again, but as you know, this time it worked. And so, Vin releases the power because she believes she's making the ultimate sacrifice. Elend is dying, and she could save him. Instead, convinced that the hero of ages must put the world before personal desire, she lets the power go. It's an act of compassion, duty, and selflessness, and it is exactly what Ruin wanted. It is deeply ironic. Rashek held the power out of selfishness and kept Ruin imprisoned. Vin surrendered it out of selflessness and unknowingly set him free. The world was doomed by the virtue of its greatest hero. What follows is the hero of ages. Ruin is finally free, and the end of the world begins. 2 shards have lost their vessels, and the planet is dying, and standing in the middle of it all is one grieving keeper, which is exactly the gap Sazed steps into. 2 shards, 2 men, both completely changed by what they carried. One who slowly lost his kind nature to the intent of the shard, and the other who was nearly erased trying to contain the damage. And into that space steps Sazed, who sought to hold both powers at once, and somehow not lose himself entirely to either. Let's look at how he is doing. Sazed's Final Ascension rebuilds Scadrial as we know it. With Ruin no longer tearing the world apart, Harmony begins rebuilding almost immediately. He restores Scadrial to something resembling the world that existed before Rashek's desperate alteration. Mountains return, green grass returns, the flowers that Mare dreamed of. and the ash disappears. In a matter of moments, Sazed accomplishes one of the greatest acts of creation we've ever seen from a shard. However, Ruin and Preservation didn't stop opposing each other just because one man holds them both. Sazed himself explained that, even united, the two intents remain fundamentally opposed. Every decision pulls him in two directions at once. For a being with near infinite power, even choosing to act becomes a struggle. That paralysis is exactly what we see in Harmony's correspondence with Hoyd. Faced with the growing threat of odium, Harmony admits something extraordinary. He knows danger is coming, but fears he may not be capable of acting when the moment arrives. So instead of becoming the weapon himself, he creates one. Instead, he builds a sword. Harmony spends much of Era 2 shaping Waxilium Ladrian into exactly that, a sword. Someone capable of decisive action when Ruin and Preservation leave Harmony unable to choose. Every moment Harmony intervenes to preserve Wax's life serves the same purpose. If Harmony cannot act directly, someone else must. However, Terrisman, one of Autonomy's own avatars, come to believe that Harmony pushed Wax to make his sword specifically because Harmony already knew he was going to become Discord. We will get into this shortly. Which means the search for a sword was Sazed preparing for his own failure, years in advance, while still calling himself Harmony. Marsh fills a similar role in a much stranger way. Still carrying every hemalurgic spike Ruin ever drove into him against his will, still compounding atium to survive 3 centuries past when he should have died, Marsh becomes one of Harmony's most trusted agents. A man originally twisted into a weapon by Ruin, now serving the very vessel that now holds Ruin's power. And then there's Trell. Trell isn't another shard, or some mysterious individual hiding on Scadrial. Trell is the identity through which Autonomy operates, a manifestation of the shard's influence that has been shaped into a religion, a worldview, and a movement. A religion called Trelligism, seeded by Autonomy long before Harmony took up the shard, ready to utilise when Autonomy wanted to begin her attack. Through Trell, Autonomy builds a foothold on Scadrial, using the set and its followers to undermine Harmony's protection from within. That influence works through the set, a secretive organisation that spreads Trell's worship, pursues hemalurgic experimentation, and works to weaken Scadrial's political stability. Terris Ladrian becomes one of the set's central leaders and a key agent of Autonomy's plan. By the time Harmony and his agent fully understand the scope of the threat, the set has already embedded itself deeply within Elendil's government and society. The immediate crisis is ultimately stopped. The bomb is defused, Terris dies after Autonomy abandons her, and Autonomy withdraws from Scadrial after recognising that this attempt has failed. But moving on from Trell, the real danger has been growing inside Harmony all along, and by the end of Era 2, the cracks are becoming impossible to ignore. Let's look at what's in store in Era 3. If you've liked the video so far, like and subscribe for more content so that you can be there when the next video on Hrathen, High Priest of Shudireth, goes live. But anyway, let's continue. Let's start with the threat that's easiest to underestimate. Trell in the short term is dealt with. The set's bomb failed, Terris instead, but the real problem isn't Trell. Trell was simply one of Autonomy's many avatars, and Harmony has warned that she will be back. And knowing how Autonomy prefers to operate through carefully crafted identities rather than direct intervention, it's difficult to believe that this chapter is truly over. But that's the external problem. The internal one is arguably worse, because for all of Era 2, the story keeps reminding us that Harmony's balance is beginning to falter. At the moment of his ascension, Sazed notes that Ruin and Preservation are trying to destroy one another. The only thing preventing it is his own mind holding two powers apart. For 300 years, one man's will has been all that's kept Harmony from collapsing into something else. With Sanderson confirming that a vessel's perception influences the shard, and Sazed increasingly frustrated by his inability to act, will he finally let loose? And there's a name for what happens if that balance finally breaks. The Terris prophecy that names the hero of ages says, "His name shall be Discord, yet they shall love him for it." At first glance, that sounds like a warning, but Brandon has pointed out that Harmony and Discord are intentionally musical terms. And that's interesting, because in music, Harmony and Discord aren't moral opposites. Harmony is different notes working together. Discord is the tension between them. One isn't inherently good, and the other isn't inherently bad. In fact, music without moments of discord never changes. It never moves, it never resolves. Much like Scadrial post-Catacendre, and even pre-Catacendre when you really think about it. Which makes the prophecy much stranger. If Discord simply meant Sazed's downfall, why would the people of Scadrial love him for it? Additionally, by the time of Era 2, a dark shadow-like figure has begun appearing behind Harmony. Kelsier sees it, describing it as a representation of Sazed's other self. Whether that's symbolic, prophetic, or something far more literal, Brandon clearly wants us thinking about Discord long before Sazed ever speaks the name himself. And another detail? Kelsier points out that Ruin was always the more powerful of the two shards. Remember, Preservation had already given away part of himself when Scadrial was created, investing humanity with the potential for Allomancy. Every person on the planet carries a fragment of Preservation, and Ruin made no equivalent sacrifice. And that means Harmony didn't inherit two perfectly equal powers. He inherited less Preservation than Ruin. For 3 centuries, Sazed has somehow forced those unequal powers into equilibrium. This isn't necessarily the same thing as equality. Maybe that's why the balance is becoming harder to maintain. Not because Sazed lacks the will to hold them together, but because the equation itself was never truly equal. Every act of Preservation draws on the smaller half. Every destructive impulse is backed by the larger one. If that's true, then perhaps becoming Discord isn't simply something Sazed can resist forever. But maybe Harmony has been trying to solve the wrong problem. For 300 years, Sazed has tried to force two fundamentally opposed powers into perfect harmony. Perhaps the prophecy isn't warning that he will fail. Perhaps it's telling us that he has to stop trying. Maybe Discord isn't Harmony breaking. Maybe it's Harmony finally accepting that Ruin and Preservation were never meant to sing the same note. Which raises a much more interesting question. If Sazed can't preserve Harmony, can he change it? It wouldn't even be unprecedented. Preservation spread part of himself throughout humanity. Honour gave rise to sapient spren by investing them, and autonomy expresses herself through countless avatars. Across the Cosmere, we've repeatedly seen shards alter how their own power is distributed. So why should Harmony be any different? Perhaps the answer is to adapt and accept Discord. If Harmony can't force perfect balance, maybe he changes the equation instead. What if he willingly gives away a portion of his own power? Just enough to restore the balance that never truly existed in the first place. If Sazed did something like this, it would be unlike anything we've ever seen before. A vessel deliberately changing the nature of a dual shard. That alone would echo throughout the Cosmere for centuries. And in the Isles of the Emberdark, I believe we've already seen a conversation foretelling such an event. Whether that means creating an avatar, investing part of Ruin into another person, or something else we've never imagined, the implications would be enormous. Sanderson has hinted several times over the years that this will feature in Era 3, and he's even provided more detail in that the imbalance of Preservation and Ruin will feature. And suddenly, Marsh looks very different. An already invested being of Ruin, with Harmony seeking a solution to the imbalance that he faces. Still carrying Ruin spikes, still burning Atium, still serving Harmony years after their time together in Kelsier's crew. Could Sazed invest a part of Ruin's power into Marsh, furthering his journey into an avatar of death? We do, after all, know that in the far future of the Cosmere, his name is well known far further than Scadrial, as seen from this quote from Tress of the Emerald Sea. Or perhaps Kelsier, the survivor who has spent centuries refusing to die and is deeply connected to Ruin and determined to protect Scadrial at any cost. Again, we do know that the power of Ruin considers Kelsier his.
Leave her alone. She's mine, Kelsier, just as you are.
None of this is confirmed, but it's one of the more compelling ways to reconcile everything Era 2 spent so much time establishing. Harmony's growing instability, the unequal balance between the two shards, and the repeated emphasis on agents who can carry burdens that Harmony himself no longer can. And underneath all of it sits the biggest reason none of this can be ignored. Retribution has fled into the Cosmere. He is free from Rashek. Raze, the original Odium, feared Harmony. But could Taravangian be looking at Sazed's difficulties as an opportunity? We have, after all, seen Sazed write to Hoyd about this very concern. He's looking at a god whose greatest battle is no longer against another shard, it's against himself. Whether Era 3 ends up with Harmony becoming Discord, dividing part of his own power, or finding some entirely different way to restore the balance, one thing seems increasingly clear. The Hero of Ages prophecy never says Discord destroys Scadrial. It says they'll love him for it. Maybe that's because Discord was never truly a catastrophe. Maybe it was always the solution. And if that's true, Era 3 may not be the story of Harmony failing. It may be the story of Sazed choosing what kind of god he wants to become, instead of playing to the tune of everybody else. To close the video out, what gets me about Sazed is that he never actually wanted power. He wanted a religion worth believing in. He spent a whole book reviewing 300 religions and rejecting every single one of them by the end, right up until the moment the world was ending and he had nothing left to lose. And yet his ascension was the founding of a new religious order, and it was a compromise between two forces that directly opposed one another, held together by one grieving man's willpower, Ati didn't get to keep himself, and Leras gave almost everything he had just to buy the world some time. How long left does Sazed have? And the prophecy in this story agrees on one thing. Sazed's own desire for harmony can't last forever. Like, subscribe, and get in the comments. I want to know what you think is next for Harmony. Vote on the next topic in the community post, because if I have the question, maybe you do too. I'll see you in the next one.